Kay and Lou Marchetti may seem like opposites in many ways, but their journeys share common threads we can all relate to. Kay's story began with his parents arriving in New York City from Cambodia with $500 in their pocket. He was a top student, an avid Magic the Gathering player, and he studied computer science and economics at Yale and quickly rose through the ranks on Wall Street, becoming one of BlackRock's youngest managing directors. Yet, he walked away from it all with no plan. Now, over a decade later, he surfs daily and shares insights on lasting career and life satisfaction through his company, Rad Reads. Dubbed the Oprah for Millennials, Kay helps ambitious professionals rethink what they want out of life. Lou, in contrast, grew up the all-American kid from a big family in Nashville, excelling in sports, and eventually walking on and starting for the University of North Carolina football team. With a degree from Wharton and a career spanning investment banking, private equity, and foreign policy, Lou thought he had checked every box of what being successful meant. But in 2019, his hard-driving lifestyle caught up with him when he collapsed in a gym and nearly died. Later fired from his high-powered job at Vista Equity Partners, Lou is now navigating a major life transition. In this episode, Kay and Lou share how they each faced what they call identity earthquakes that forced them to reevaluate their lives and what was most important to them. They talk about the challenges of leaving the so-called money game in search of deeper fulfillment, and their stories highlight the pressures of maintaining an image, the challenges of stepping away from chasing wealth without a purpose, and practical steps and questions they asked themselves as they worked towards building more meaningful lives. This was an incredible conversation filled with honesty and wisdom. Thank you to Kay and Lou for sharing their stories, and we hope you enjoy this episode. All right, so Kay and Lou, thank you both for being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm excited about this conversation today.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thank you.
So this is the first time I've had two guests on at the same time, both via Zoom. So any awkward pauses, I'll own those ones as I get more comfortable with this format. But I think in speaking with both of you and being introduced to both of you through mutual friends, this conversation was a great transition point, I think, for our podcast, right? In focusing in on inflection points in people's lives. I think many of our listeners I would define as career-oriented, high performers. And as we get into 2025 here, this is a time of year where it goes much broader than the financial planning aspect of things in terms of people taking a look at last year, what worked, what didn't, where do they want to go moving forward? And given the unique paths and your unique stories, I wanted to bring you two together to have that conversation so our listeners can sort of listen to, your inflection points, where you pivoted in big ways in your lives and find ways where maybe they can apply, some of the principles you've learned, some of the lessons you learned maybe the hard way, to their own situations and their own stories. So before jumping into anything specific, I think what I wanted listeners to understand was you as people, right? Not just the resumes, not just what they see on LinkedIn or whatever, but who are these people, and where did they come from? What led them to this point in their lives? So, Kay, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit about your career path? You've been really open about it. I've followed your story actually even before we met through our introduction with Gerald. But can you share? You went from I think the term you used was I was a recovering Wall Streeter, and now you've been. And the nickname is just so good, I'm sure you don't mind using it. But you've now been called the Oprah for Millennials, so that's a hell of a shift. How does that happen? Give us your background for listeners in a few minutes.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for having me. And fun fact, I'm not even a millennial. I'm on the lower cusp of Gen X. I guess I would start my story. My name is Kay. I'm a father of two young-ish girls, 10 and 7. husband to Lisa, born and raised in New York City and live in Manhattan Beach, California. And the story is, I would say, a typical-ish story of first generation immigrants. My parents came to New York City in 1973 with $500 to their name. They weren't escaping a genocide, but a genocide in Cambodia was happening as they were building a life for themselves in New York City. I grew up with my parents that gave everything they had for my sister and I to have opportunities in education, believing that that was what was going to lead us to have comfortable, safe, happy, and satisfied lives. And so with that, I just, put my head down, worked my butt off, studied my butt off, didn't drink, didn't have girlfriends, didn't party. I blew off some steam playing Magic the Gathering and doing men's gymnastics. So that could kind of tell you a little bit of the kind of high school, dweeb that I was. I ended up going to Yale. I picked the major that I thought would make me the most money. It was computer science in 1997. I took a second major that would make me the second most money, which was economics. And then when the banks came in 2001 and descended upon us all and said, give us your hungry, give us your rich, give us your poor, I raised my hand and said, sure, I'll do this thing called investment banking, even though I didn't know what the phrase due diligence meant. And I was interviewing for investment banking jobs. I got a job in investment banking and basically worked extremely hard, combination of hard work and hard luck. 14 years on Wall Street, 2 years in banking, 12 years in alternative asset management, fund of hedge funds specifically. And at 31, I was promoted one of the youngest managing directors at BlackRock. And at 35, I was just, there's this Led Zeppelin song, like Comfortably Numb. I was kind of comfortably numb and I was like, I looked at the folks who were
Floyd?
Pink Floyd. Yeah, that's right. I looked at folks who were 5 years older, 10 years older, 20 years older, and they had great lives by like any stretch of the imagination, but not what I wanted. And so I kind of, hit Control Alt Delete. And I'm like, what does life look like if I was going to kind of redraw everything from first principles? So that was the inflection point. I wasn't independently wealthy. I didn't have FU money, but I had enough money to like take a break.
Yeah. That a lot of that sticks out, not the amount of money you were making or the level you got to, but just that New York life of looking at the people above you, that really resonates with me. I remember just a guy I worked with, and he was a great guy. He had a family, lived way outside the city in the burbs, and just watching him grind with the commute alone, and me just being like, I don't think this is going to be me. Now what, and then I want to get to Lou's story, which, is a little bit more intense maybe in some ways. But what was it was there a switch that flipped, because most people at 35 at that point in the race are not self-aware enough, to even realize what that itch they need to scratch may be. But you talked about going back to first principles. How did you start the decision-making process at such a young age to really blow it up and start over again?
Yeah. I think that unbeknownst to me, because I didn't identify as an entrepreneur, but there's a thing about entrepreneurs that they have a screw loose in their head, because the expected value of entrepreneurship is not positive. And so you have to kind of be a little bit delusional to take a leap like that. So I think that there were I would say there were like three things that really impacted me. The first was just looking ahead and just saying like, I don't want this life, right? I don't want two, at the time it was X5s. I don't want two X5s. I don't want, my kids to go to Deerfield Academy. And I don't want to vacation in Sun Valley. It didn't align with my interest. Right. And that was what a lot of people at that level were playing for. So I didn't want what, the prizes were of the game. The second was, I was really living like experiencing the marginal value of the next dollar, right? And so what I mean by that is that, not all dollars are created equal, right? If you went to Elon Musk and you said to him like, hey, I'll give you $330 million if you do burpees all day for like one day. That's 10 basis points of his net worth. It's like equivalent of someone with $5 million buying a business class ticket on an airplane. He'd probably say no, right? Because the marginal value of 330 million to Elon Musk is zero.
Yep.
He has 330 billion. So I was starting to get a taste of that, and the way I saw it is that I get these like big bonuses, 7-figure bonuses. I would go buy myself a nice coat, like a $2,000 coat. We would book a vacation with my wife to go to a nice, 4 seasons somewhere, like somewhere in the Caribbean. And then I would invest the rest in the S&P 500. I'm like, okay, cool. Click. Let's wait for another year. One more nice coat, one more vacation in another nice hotel for like 4 or 5 days. And I just started to realize that like the marginal value of the next dollar wasn't worth it. And so what did I want money for? I wanted money to buy back more free time, right? Not to like Netflix and chill, but to just like do what I wanted to do, express myself creatively, try new things, take risks, not have every day be the same. And so those were like the culmination of like the points that led me to say, you know what, I'm going to put some money to the side. I'm going to take a break and see if something will arise during that break. And by the way, I always said to myself, if I didn't land on my next thing during that break, which was roughly 18 months in my mind, I'd just go back.
Yeah. It's important not to think for the next 10 years or the next 18 years, but you knew 18 months and then you allow kind of one thing to lead to the other. But we always talk about just positioning. Like, can you position yourselves to take the risk or to explore what you're really interested in? And that the positioning alone allows for that freedom maybe to come a little bit at a time. And then next thing you know, you're 45 and you've been doing it for a decade. And just to put it in very specific terms, I gave myself 18 months to 2 years of runway, which was about 5% of my net worth. And so I said, am I willing to incinerate 5% of my net worth to take a shot at myself? That was the math. Good trade. Yeah. Good trade, even if it is all downside, right?
Exactly.
So Lou, same question to you. I think though, what do you take that resonates, that is similar in your story? And then, there obviously are some big differences, which you can get into. And I think thankfully we can, laugh about them now, but give listeners an idea as to your version of that same story and the lead up to this, this major decision in your life.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It's fun to do it with Kay. And I appreciate his story, and I'm still learning. I'm still taking notes as he's speaking, and you guys are talking about it. In some ways, our stories are similar, but they're also very different. Is the backgrounds in particular. I'm a dad as well. We're not quite as far along, so I'll also take notes on any advice from you guys on raising kiddos, or any of your listeners for that matter. We got a 21-month-old who's a lot of fun. But I was an achiever my whole life, and I was also, in some ways, I was kind of the quintessential privileged white dude. My parents had some money. We were kind of upper middle class. I'm not sure where. I think I like to make myself out to be like I didn't have as much as I actually did when I was a kid. But I never wanted for anything in a way. We didn't have a bunch of, toys and all kinds of travel all over Europe and the world, which, I have the privilege of doing some of that now, but I had what I needed. And I grew up in Nashville in a family of 4 kiddos, and my dad's the oldest of 9. My mom was one of 6. And so big Italian, Irish Catholic family, everybody around all the time. I didn't know what Wall Street was, honestly, when I was a kid. I was kind of in the confines of my family and looking around. And but I always found 2 things stuck out. One are people, and the second one's achieving. And so big family that people come from. the achieving is, nature and nurture. As I kind of started to grow up, that really came out in school and then the athletic field. That's what I thought I was supposed to do. And if you see me in person, I'm 6'7", so people automatically say you have to play sports. I'm a very average basketball player, to be clear. And so it's kind of funny. So, but I love football. And so it was football in school. And like, as I say, in some ways, I was this quintessential kind of all-American kid. That's what I strived to be. I was actually the prom king. I was actually class president. I was the captain of the football team. I was like all these things that you put on your list. And I was like, yes, look at me, everybody. I'm doing it. Look at me, dad. Look at me, mom. Look at me, family, everybody. And I got the chance to I took that and went to college, and I always had a chip on my shoulder. It was kind of funny. Our high school, the rival high school was where the guy who wrote Dead Poet Society went to for a year.
Huh.
And so I have that picture, and we were I thought of as like the poor Catholic kids who worked harder. Probably not entirely true, but a fun myth to tell yourself. So I always had this chip on my shoulder. So as I went through my career and even choosing colleges, it was I want to compete at the highest level and I want to win. So I wanted to play football. I ended up having the chance to walk on to the University of North Carolina Tar Heels, and which was, by the way, a shock to everyone in my high school. The father, I'm fighting Irish because I didn't go to Notre Dame, which ended up being terrible. If you're a college football fan during that time of year, Bob Davies was the coach. And so I got to go play for Mac Brown, and I had this, ended up getting a scholarship, getting a chance to start, getting a chance to captain the team in a game, and I had this, and didn't get hurt, most importantly. And then I came out and said, all right, so what can I do now? And the thing that I had no idea even existed was this thing, which Kate as well, called investment banking. And so I remember even interviewing, and I didn't know the difference between the black and the red. And somebody was, funny finance joke now, but I was like green, black. And I was like, I'm not really sure. So, but I did it, and I was pretty bad at it actually. And to the point where if it wasn't for a wonderful mentor, getting Frank and Brew, who kind of took me under his wing, I would have been booted out of that. But I didn't want to fail. And so let's fast forward, did that.
Did you start in New York as well, Lou?
No, I was in Nashville because I redshirted, played an extra year, and came out in December. And there was a firm that was, there was a mix of the Morgan, Drexel Burnham, the guy who used to run that, again, Freddie Joseph, and then John Morgan, who I think was the great grandson of JP Morgan. This was the time when mid-market banks were coming together, because they were just getting eaten up by the big ones. And so I had the chance to work in Nashville, which was awesome. New York and Nashville were the two offices. And I was like, why would I leave here? This is home. And so I got a chance to do that. And then I got this funny moment when I was after second year, and in that world, you get asked to stay on board or you don't. And I didn't think I was, but I worked my ass off for the 6 months before when they told me I needed to. And they said, hey, you got a chance to do it. And I said, actually, thanks. I'm going to go do something different. And I went and worked in the foreign policy world at the U.S. Department of State, because that was my interest. Wow. That was honestly probably the thing that, if I look back in my career, the thing that I really did because it was a passion and an interest. You get to DC, everybody's got degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees. And so I needed to get another degree, right? So I'm very influenced by what other people think. So I went back, did my MBA at Wharton, UPenn, and I came out, and private equity was very hot. That was the thing, 2009. So I did that for 13 years. And honestly, I wasn't very good at that either. At least the quantitative part of it. But I am really good at the interpersonal side and the qualitative side, and kind of being able to kind of zoom out and try to understand the business. And so I ended up getting some great chances to work at a firm called Vista Equity Partners, which was very small at the time, 20 some odd people. It's grown to be one of the larger private equity firms. And I got to kind of be a utility player there, and ended up carving out, doing a lot of kind of building business development, being business there, chief of staff, moving up the ranks to kind of a junior partner level. And that was all I thought going well. And I got very caught up in all the world that Kay was talking about. And I wish I had the insight to say, gosh, why am I doing this? And what's the cost to me and to everyone around me that I'm impacting? I never did that. And so it really, my stopping and my getting out of the world of finance, which I'm out of now, really happened in a very divine, very startling way. So this is kind of the cliffhanger that you're referring to, Mike. And so this was May 16th, 2019. I had just flown back the night before from Boston for a work trip. I was about to go to Philadelphia for my 10-year business school reunion. I needed to get a workout in. I was training for a mountain climb in Europe, to climb Mont Blanc. And that was my life. And so I was just running and gunning, and how hard can I go? How quickly can I go? How can I win at everything, every minute? It was kind of like David Goggins' mentality if you read his stuff, which there's some benefit to it, but it can be overdone, as I did. And so I'm sitting there, and I don't remember any of it. So I come back, apparently I go to work out in the gym the day before. We had a big offsite, which was an intensive fair at my firm. And I finished my usual 9-round high intensity work, and my trainer tells me that I collapsed and went unconscious. My eyes rolled the back of my head. I started gasping for breath like a fish out of water, and my heart stopped. It shut off blood flow to my brain, lungs, vital organs. I was in cardiac arrest, medical terms. And if it wasn't for 2 women that were really angels that day, I would have died. 9 out of 10 people died who experienced that.
That's insane.
It was crazy. And I don't remember any of it, so I can talk about it without any trauma. So we can go in as deep as you want. But these 2 women saved me, and one grabbed the AED, the other one happened to train all the lifeguards in Austin and CPR, and she happened to be in the gym on the day that I wasn't usually there. And so just all these, universe kind of conspiring to somehow keep me here. And, excuse me, put me in a coma, hypothermia protocol, and they brought me out of it. And the first thing I wanted to do, honestly, was get back to work and prove to people that because my image was so wrapped up in this invincibility, this achievement, this success. And so I was just like, I got to do it. I remember my then boss at the time asked me, and he was like, he said, "Did you see the light?" I said, "No, I feel a little robbed because I didn't have this awesome near-death experience." So I feel a little bummed about that. But he said, "So what did you learn?" I said, "Man, I'm in the right place at the right time, doing what I love, and I don't need to change a thing."
Huh. That's what you got from it, huh?
That's what I got. That was 2 weeks afterwards. Now, fast forward 5.5 years, and it's a different story. Sure. But I wasn't ready, Mike. I wasn't ready to process it, and I wasn't ready to ask the question, take a step back, to the point that mountain I was going to climb, I went and tried to climb it 5 weeks later after going into cardiac arrest and dying on the gym floor. And fortunately, the universe had another message for me, and a big rock about the size of a seat cushion got loose and came tumbling down as we were climbing and shattered this right hand. And I got heeled off the mountain, had emergency surgery to repair it.
Wow.
And still, I wasn't going to stop. There was a funny little moment in that where I was messaging the guide to be like, how can I get back up the mountain? My now wife was sitting next to me like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But how do I stop you? And they couldn't tell me. They didn't want to break my heart. And it was this French doctor, when we asked him, we were using Google Translate. We're like, can I drive? Can I write? Can I do this? And we got to, can I climb the mountain? And he was like, we. And he goes, no, montaña. No, montaña. We were like, okay, I get it. So that was like you would have thought I really stopped then, but I didn't. I was like, well, I'm gonna prove it if I can't change I'm not invincible anymore, then I can at least do it in the job. So I was like, I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to do this. And there's a lot of change at the top of my old firm, but I was like, I'm going to show everybody. And then 2 years to the day that I went into cardiac arrest, I got fired and told that I needed an exit plan. And really that process, one, it was just ego destroying. Mm-hmm. I was like, wait a second. And I was, anybody who's gotten pushed out or fired, like, never thinks it's their fault at all, by the way. And so I was in that, you're trying to process it all. But over that kind of 6-7 months, I actually left. And then when I actually stopped, that's when I finally took a step back. I don't know if it was desperation or courage or divine intervention, whatever it was. It was just, I just had to, like something in me said, you gotta stop.
Yeah. You called right out of the gates, you said, everything was based around being identified as an achiever. I think, Kay, I was listening to you in another conversation you talked about status chasing and how inherently at a young age, you became sort of ingrained in that pattern of behavior of status chasing. And I think that is one thing many people at that stage have in life. And, I'm guilty of it as much as anybody too. And so what other qualities for UK, other than that status chasing, and Lou, for you, that achieving, were they driving the majority of your behaviors at this stage in your lives?
I think that, status is, for me, status it shows up in like recognition, right? Youngest man. You could see it's been 14 years since I was promoted to managing director, and I never miss a beat to remind people of that. Right. So, that like status is one thing. And then it's also like, like I lived in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and then now I live in Manhattan Beach, California. It's like there is this kind of unspoken, where you live, what you can afford and all that. And so I think that was definitely a big driver for me. And when I reflect back on it though, I think, and we can talk about the kind of inner journey that I've been on. I know Lou's been on a version of his, but I think that when you peel back, like what's behind the desire what's behind the desire to flex on, what you own or what you can afford or what, where you live. And for me, what it was is just like truly a desire to be seen by others. Right. And so it's funny when I'm listening to Lou talk, like all American boy, like 6'7", prom king, played football. I'm like nerdy ass Asian kid. Like the only tournament I ever won was gathering. Parents don't know how to assimilate like culturally in this country. I want to like call a spade a spade. I want it to be white, right? Like I wanted to be a white boy. Like, and so I think that at the core, I was like, well, clearly, like I'm actually a quarter Caucasian, and so I do play that up in conversation and so on. But what I truly wanted was like to be seen as good, or to be seen as worthy, or to be seen as special as the way, the prom king is seen. And since I wasn't going to ever become a 6'7" football player, what path did I have for that? What was my path? And my path was making money, getting accolades that were well known. And here's a funny story, for you, Bill. So like I opted out, I left at 35 and, I opted out of the money game. Like there was no way that I was going to recreate the financial success that I had at Wall Street by doing the types of things that I wanted to do. And mostly like I just didn't want to work that hard. But I pulled a little switcheroo. And what the switcheroo was, and I love Arthur Brooks talks about it in From Strength to Strength. It's like he calls it the 4 false idols. There's money, fame, power, and pleasure, right? And they kind of veer you off track because they deliver this like immediate hit of dopamine of like, oh, I feel so good when I have a taste of power or a taste of pleasure. But they're not like sustainable over like, multiple cycles, to use finance parlance. And so the switcheroo that I pulled without even knowing it was I traded the pursuit of money for the pursuit of fame. Again, not like Kim Kardashian type fame, but fame of like thought leadership fame, fame as in like internet, like internet famous fame. And, it took me about 7 or 8 years to figure out, like, you just swapped one desire for another that's still coming from that same place. It's like, just like people see me as good, see me as special, see me as like valuable to society. And I'm married, happily married. My kids, I have a great relationship with my kids, great relationship with my parents, but it is this like much deeper pull that like, please see me, don't forget about me. And I think that I'm actually I think I'm having a quiet transition away from that 10 years later to be like, why do I even care about that?
Yeah. I mean, the amount of just self-awareness it takes for each of the observations you both made so far is immense and I would say unusual in a lot of ways. But the patterns that underlie, whether it's being seen or not feeling worthy, whether you're the All-American quarterback or, doing
Magic the Gathering champion.
Yeah. Yeah. It does some of these root causes, they do boil down to some of the same things. How about you, Lou? The achiever piece, does that, I'd imagine with a good amount of what Kay said, kind of resonates with your version of it as well.
Yeah, very much. At some point, Kate, are going to start finishing each other's sentences here on this podcast. But 100%. And even it was behind all of this for me, as I've done a lot of introspection and had a lot of these conversations with people about it. It was fear. It was fear. It was fear of not being accepted by accepting myself, but fear that others wouldn't like me. Like, it's kind of the story of the kid who just wants your friends and parents to like you for who you are, yet you're putting up all these fronts and giving them all these reasons to hold on to these things that you think, kind of these gold stars, if you will. Like, the more gold stars I got, the more people would like me, at least I thought. And it was fear of rejection from people. It was fear of failure. Like, it just kept me going. I didn't know what I was actually wanting to do. I don't know what the positive side of it was, other than that I just wanted to be loved and accepted and to be seen and recognized. And, I've learned that I'm wired that way. If you get into Enneagram work, I'm a 3, which is it's very prevalent.
I'm a 3.
Yeah. It's kind of the American prototype, and we could spend hours talking about Enneagram. But happy to share some resources that and have some as well. But some people are wired that way, and that's kind of the American prototype, is like this competitive achiever, like this performer, like, look at me, like, look at all this stuff. But it was very externally driven. So I think fear is kind of 1, 2, and 3 on my list of why I was doing all that stuff. But again, it's kind of looking back on it. It's and I love, like, there's some beauty in achieving and ambition, and like, it's not all bad. And I think I had to reconcile as I was going through it, because I had so much fire in kind of Eastern terms. And I remember I saw a mystic, and she basically said that the fire inside me was trying to leave this earth, like it caught wild and almost extinguished. That was the explanation for what happened to me in the gym 5.5 years ago. The doctors, the Western world has no idea what happened to me. I saw all the doctors, all of them. And they don't know. But in this one, this made the most sense I've heard. And I was like, wow. So then I just said, basically, fuck you, fire. I got to be all water. And, I got to be calm, and I got to zen. And that's just not me.
You're not, though. Yeah.
I'm not. So, like, how do you integrate it? How do you bring it to balance? How do you kind of make it part of me? So that's been my interesting journey. I remember my wife not too long ago, asked me, like, what are you doing? Like, she married this guy who was this jet setting, like, doing all these things that, looked really good on paper. And like, if you're looking from the outside, looked good. And we can get into more of the how I just was destroying my relationships with her and other people along the way. And she asked me, she said, gosh, I just want you where's that confidence? And it was a nice, healthy kick in the ass to me to be like, man, you gotta like pursue this new thing, whatever this new thing is, with some vigor. And there's a Steinbeck quote that says something to the extent of, my wife married a man, like, she did not marry a grown-up baby. And like, so I'm not going to be a baby. And it's kind of like in this, and I butchered some beautiful words by Steinbeck there, but it's kind of the same. I was like, wait a second, like, let's step into who you are, but also recognize why you're doing the things you do. So you come from a place that's really aligned and more internally with your true self, your soul, whatever you want to call it. And then also understand the cost that it was impacting me physically, which is a very obvious one, but also in destroying my relationships. Because in the end, I was a pretty self-absorbed asshole. It was all about what can you do for me? Like I would go on this podcast and I would be like, oh, I really want to help Mike out. And thinking that Mike really needs my help. And, I want to help promote Kay. Like he needs my help. And they'd be like, oh, I bet they're so excited that this big finance dude's going to come in here and talk. That's how I thought, honestly. I didn't even recognize it. And it was all about everybody was part of the Lou Marchetti show. And I put on like a really good guy perception, probably because I was raised that way. But I was good guy because I didn't want to go to hell in a way.
Even that's transactional in a way.
And that's transactional. Yeah. And everyone else, I thought I was the star in everybody else's show too. But I never really realized this until like afterwards. I was like, oh my gosh, like holy shit. And I remember I had one conversation with a friend who's like an older brother to me, a cousin who had about 3 months afterwards he sent an email. He'd gotten laid off. And the email was a bit cryptic, but I had time and I sat down I stopped, I made some space. I wrote a nice email back, said, give me a call, whatever. And later, this guy like took me to baseball card shows when we were kids. Like he was 18, 17, I was like 8. And he called me and we spoke for 2 hours. And I had no idea what he's gone through and who he was for the last 15 years of my life. And this was a person I was very close to. And listen, it was so hard and just so nourishing at the same time to just sit there and take it in. And literally, I would have thought in my previous world that I bet he's super excited that I would have shot him a text, like, keep your head up, man. You're awesome. And I bet he would have thought, in my mind, I would have thought like, oh gosh, man, thank goodness. Awesome cousin Lou is sending me a text right now. Like he's really pumping me up. That's the way I viewed it rather than be like, oh gosh, like this guy's going through something.
Yeah.
I don't even know who he is. I don't know who I am. So anyways, that's kind of where
but I think, so you tugged on a thread I want to go down. So one thing I want to take is a lot of these observations that both of you had. How can listeners now do some practical real life things that, and I hate the term sort of like, just like productivity and, just going and doing more of the same, but how can they apply it in a way that allows their lives to get better? And I want to get there. But the first thing that I wanted to stop on that you said was the what it did to the relationships around you. This climbing of the ladder, and really you're on a hamster wheel in a lot of ways. So Kay, you do this. Now, what I think is pretty cool is you kind of married maybe some of the intuitive things of like, I know that what that person's doing across from me is not interesting to me. Most people, they're not really at a point to make even that observation, I think, at a certain, when they're on that hamster wheel. So you did that, but then you went and you did the quantitative work of like, look, this is 5% of my net worth. Let me light this on fire. And so that marriage of the two things is probably why you got out of that cycle maybe sooner than others. But that's all well and good, as my old football coach used to say. But like, how do the people around you react initially? Because that is a huge influencer. And it's something I know in my own kind of transition and going from large, old school firms to, a firm that was founded in 2017 based in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Like, you're getting some looks, right? You're getting some, are you sure? And it could really lead to self-doubt. I know it did with me, with certain conversations. So what was the reaction number one? Maybe you didn't have anybody doubting you, but what was that general reaction of the people closest to you, and how did it impact you?
Yeah. I call this phase, it's like the identity earthquake. It's like, are you willing to blow up your identity? Because your identity is kind of your portmanteau into the world, right? Like, you look at any of us, you're like, oh, you work in financial services, you went to these top schools, you played D1 sports, whatever. There's like a whole set of downstream assumptions that people make about you. Like, classic example, you see someone working at a Starbucks, and one person has a Mac, and the other person has a a PC, Windows computer. What do you assume what industry each person's in? Just like based on that one thing, right? And so we have these markers that we carry. And so I'll give you the craziest example was, well, first people thought I was lying. So I said, I'm quitting finance and I don't have a plan. And they're like, you're just saying that to get out of your non-compete. And I'm like, nope, I don't have a plan. And they're like,
a lot about the finance world. No, that's like, not possible. Must be something else.
They're like, you must be crazy. So there were three groups of people, because it was a bit of a Rorschach test on like, what do you actually stand for? Right. So when I quit without a plan, once they realized that there was genuinely no plan, there was one group that's like, you're doing what I want to do. I don't have the courage to do that. I don't have the means to do that, whatever.
But I respect
I'm so happy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Respect. Game, recognized game. Right. Then there was a second group that would just be like, they would just like put these jabs in. They're like, ooh, are you a little lost? Midlife crisis, soul searching. And I actually found out that someone who knew me very well made a claim. He's like, mark my words, I've seen this story before. Finance guys are not natural entrepreneurs, which is actually true. He's going to spend way more money than he thought he would, which is actually true as well. And in 5 years, his wife's going to leave him. Like he said, this behind my back, and it got back to me. So this is the kind of stuff, like, think about the pain that someone must be in. Well, like my decision had no impact on his life. Think about the pain that someone must be in to project that onto you because of some decision that you made that has no bearing on their life. So that's the second group of people. And then the third group of people, they just don't give a F, right? They're just like, cool.
Yeah, great.
I got this bill to pay tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like, when am I getting promoted to managing director? And then you realize like, wow. So those are like kind of the three groups of people that I met. Now, obviously, the third group, you want them to care, but they don't. The first group, you're just like, oh, whatever. You're just being nice, but what's that thing? It's when you bias towards negativity bias. The middle group is the one that's like chirping in your ear the whole time.
And the jabs,
right?
And I may be speaking my own story here, but the jabs are way louder. Like it might be this little thing embedded in a long compliment, but the only thing I'll grab onto is that. And it may not even be there sometimes. Exactly.
And the question is like, what do you want to see? What are you willing to see? Right. It comes back to your sense of self. So that part was really hard. I mean, even like my parents, they're like, what do I tell your aunts, your aunties, like what you're doing? I'm like, I don't know, like tell them I'm taking a sabbatical. My wife, we moved, we were in these early phase. Lou's not even there yet, but there's a phase where you go on adult dates, which is basically like when your kid enters kindergarten, like you just like enter this like adult dating, I call it. And you make all these new friends. It's like a very like a launch point for new friends. We're like, what do you do? My wife's like, what do I explain to them what you do? It's the third question that everyone asks. I'm like, oh, just tell them I'm fun employed. I'm like, I am not telling a new parent at our school that my husband is fun employed. I'm like, I don't know, tell them I'm a blogger or something. But you're not a blogger. I'm like, well, I don't know, I write on the internet, And so the identity earthquake really, it ripples out. It hits your family. It hits your community. It hits your college friends. Like it hits your old boss. Right. And I think that void, I was in that identity kind of death cycle for, I don't know, like 2 years maybe. And that's the thing. I mean, Lou, you've probably seen this as well. A lot of people go back. I think that there's this honeymoon period. The first 6 months, you're like, wait, I could go to the gym at 2:00 on a Tuesday. Hell yeah. Like, wait, I don't need to set an alarm. Hell yeah. And then that, like anything pleasurable, it just kind of, it's still nice, but it's not as nice. And then all the jabs just get louder and louder. They're like, wait, you left like 7 months ago and you still don't know what you're doing. Jab, 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 jab. They're like, what do I call you now? Jab, 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 jab. Like you go to a conference and you don't have a business card. Jab, 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 jab. Right. And I think that like I've seen it. Like Lou, I could count on two hands the number of people that have left, like senior roles and not gone back. Like you are like one of 10.
Yeah.
And I've been out of the game for 10 years. And I talked to a lot of people in different phases. So most people go back, because that identity earthquake is so powerful. It's so disorienting. That sense of self gets so ripped out of your soul. And I've talked a lot. I could talk about how I adapted on that, but that was really, I think that was like my greatest move, was not like my next business idea or even my work ethic, was like to find a sense of self amidst the identity earthquake, to me courage and the strength to play another day, basically to not get stopped out of a trade. And 10 years later, now I'm like, like I'm kind of like the buy and hold investor. Like I've ridden through a bunch of cycles, and like I just know the right thing is to just keep doing what I'm doing.
But it doesn't go away, right? It doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
So
it definitely doesn't go. I mean, look, my friends, like,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I left 10 years. I'm a numbers guy. I kind of have a sense of like the money that I left behind, I know what my friends made and my colleagues and all that. And I just like did the math. 10 years was $18 million. It's like, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. The other thing, and that is a good point, because I think like the identity earthquake is, I just think, a genius way to put it. And that comes at other times in life too. Like, you get injured. I got injured when I played football in college and I had to stop, and you have to go through like minor league versions of this, which in hindsight maybe helped me later when the big earthquake came. But there's the identity or the ego battle, right? And that's internal, but it's also in your relationships, and it shows up in different ways. But then there's the practical. It's like, and I have this conversation with clients every day. It's like, yeah, this is great, Mike. And I agree with, Kay's story. And I want to go surfing. I want to move to California, and I want to do my version of that thing. But like, I got to make sure I can pay the mortgage for 18 months. So how do you square, Lou, and I asked this for both of you, but how do you square the practical with some of this other emotional, for lack of a better term, stuff that comes with making that leap?
Yeah. So Kate makes a really good point. You did too. It's if you decide to go on this journey, we'll just call it that. It's different. It's different than what most people are doing, and kind of society will tell you should go back in, because we're all, if you follow psychology and kind of where we are, like we're very wired, as you said, you focus on the negative. We're very fear driven, right? But there aren't woolly mammoths chasing us anymore. And one teacher called it kind of fear is false evidence appearing real. And I was like, and like we can, you can sit in bed and create the same neurological chemical reaction thinking about stuff as if a train was coming down the tracks and you were sitting there looking at it. Like, you can do this. This is what this is proven by people who actually know what they're talking about in this world.
Okay, I think your last, and I don't want to date the episode here, but your last newsletter had, the first thing was that anxiety brain, right? Like the fight versus flight, and recognize it.
It's very prominent. So the question is, how do you get out of that pattern? Well, maybe it's the absence of these things to start with in your life is helpful. And I don't mean the romanticized version of you quit and become a movie star, or or in the Catholic Church, it was always you become St. Francis or Mother Teresa. I'm not talking about that. That's if that's your thing, that's your thing. But that's not most people in the world. And you don't have to totally, like I said, I got to be who I am. But the number one practical advice I could give anybody, two things. One is what Kay said, which is don't be reckless. Like, do a little bit of planning. Like, we did this too. My wife and I looked and said, okay, we need this much money. Let's look and see where we are. How much time do we have? By the way, I did all that and we had a good bit of time, and I still was like, I'm going to take 1 month. And then it ended up being, once I stopped, I was like, I am so exhausted and tired and just, I have no idea what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. And so it ended up being 15 months till our newborn baby came. So I got to be a dad, which was really fun. But one is, don't be reckless. Do a little bit of planning, but do enough just to kind of turn the dimmer switch up, right? Like, so that, hey, if I walk into this room, if it's for 18 months as Kay did, or for what was going to be a year for me, you know that the world's going to collapse around you and you can, address the responsibilities. The second thing is, in some ways, we have to stop. Like it's really hard to rewire if you don't create space. And that's what I mean by stopping, creating space. So it can be, not everybody gets a chance to go on a sabbatical. I think we're both very fortunate in that regard. But you can stop every day for minutes. You can stop every week for hours. We can all stop every year for at least a couple weeks cumulatively, right? We think we can't, but how many times have we gone away from work and we come back and, oh my God, the firm's okay. Like, it didn't collapse. And even if you're an entrepreneur, it's like, oh my gosh, wow, the business is still here, right? And, but stopping, because in order to actually go do the work that we're talking about, we have to stop and create space to go do it. Because in other words, what's the definition? And the other option is insanity. Like, what's the definition, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Or I think too, like, people will do it off the side of their desk while still by not completely removing themselves. And it can actually kind of make things worse because now we're just juggling more stuff in both in our head, but also in the amount of time we have in the day. So you could actually be compounding it by not just taking that time to step back in one form or another.
Yeah. And I listen, a lot of people recommend this, and we can have our own stories, and I don't pretend to know everybody, how they're wired. And, you listen to my story, which is just one person's story, which I had to take a sabbatical, and I had the fortune to be able to do that. But I did choose to go do it. Some people recommend what you just described, to start to pursue an interest. I have a really thoughtful friend who's a mentor who said he kind of got to a better place, if you will. He was in a miserable job, and his relationships were kind of miserable. He said, I took 1 hour each week, and I figured out the 3 or 4 things that he really loved. And he'd take 1 hour each week, and he went and did it. One of them was writing plays. Another one was kind of this interesting, like, he was very interested in theology. Another one was just some more enjoyable, like having fun type, and he just did specific things, playing, this leisure activities that he loved, and like, go start there. Like, because until we figure out why we're doing the things that we're doing, or at least start to figure that out, you're not going to be able to address, you don't even get to go through this identity crisis and figure out, as Maslow said, the masterpiece and the mess, right? But you have to figure out ways to stop. And that's, a lot of people do mindfulness practices. I mean, you can just go on a walk without your phone during lunch.
Right. Put the phone down, go, play soccer, jump in the pool. Like, there's a million ways to take this.
Don't do anything. Yeah. Don't do anything. Like, don't feel like you got to go play something or do something or achieve. On this walk, I'm going to come up with this idea and I'm going to resolve the issue with my wife.
Yeah.
Let all that go and just go on a walk for 45 minutes without any agenda, and put your phone in your drawer and just see what happens, and start to build these habits up, these practices up, where, like, you kind of have to rewire, right? You learn how to work out one way, and then you got to rewire to do it a totally different way, because this one way your back kept getting hurt, but you kept doing it. And then you're like, wait a second, I wasn't using this. I wasn't using the core, blah, blah, blah. But you have to create these habits each day. And the goal isn't to meditate for 3 hours a day. That's not what I'm recommending. Like, everyone's got to go see what that thing is, but just create some space. Even right now, like, everyone can do this, even in the middle of the holidays. Like, crazy as that sounds, be like, oh God, I got to get stuff by the end of the year. Like, how many times do we take a minute away and have a meaningful conversation with somebody? How many times do we take a minute away and go for a walk, or just sit with yourself for 20 minutes? And then we're so recharged and we're so aware, and we just go right back in. And for that next bit, that's when you can be productive. But it's hard to do because we don't think we're allowed to do it. We don't give ourselves that sort of thing, that sort of permission to go just create some space and just go do it.
I think whether it's meditating or taking a walk, right? Like, two basic things. When I started doing both of them, like, I viewed it as, all right, well, then the payoff will come. And like, it wasn't to take the space. Outcome. It was because so-and-so did it, and it'll help my productivity, or it'll make me less, like, you're looking for that payoff. versus taking the space for the space. And then usually what happens, which I took a long time to learn and I'm still learning it, but like usually what happens is then the door opens over here that wasn't even
100%.
kind of there, right? What do you think?
Yes.
I think, Blaise Pascal said all of humankind's problems come from their inability to spend 15 minutes by themselves. So, and this was before the iPhone came out. I definitely agree with that. And what Lou's saying is like giving the space. I think that like, if you're in these like hard charging careers, you're like, it's like monocropping where it's just like you're planting the same vegetable like over and over again. And you're like depleting the soil of its nutrients. And you're just like trying harder with like more fertilizer and more like when all you need is like you need to let the land sit and regenerate itself. And then you'll have an even better result. But that's really hard. I mean, we live in a society, we talked about the identity thing. And then there's kind of these expectations, like some of them are real and some of them are fabricated, that like there's always like another thing to like address, right? It's like, like people told me all the time, they're like, you're like screwing up your kids by leaving. I'm like, wait, screwing up my kids? Yeah, because all that money that I could have made, I could have like gotten them the best in like China and like all this stuff. And I'm like, it's been 10 years and I have missed 6 nights bedtimes a year, 60 bedtimes in 10 years.
Wow.
Tell me how I'm ruining my kids again by doing this. Right. And again, so I think it requires that space. And in that space, you see the perspective shift. But where I wanted to add on to Luke's point is that so I am about to cross 10,000 hours as a writer, and it will have taken me about a decade to cross that point. Fun fact about me is I never wrote anything for fun. So like I only wrote things like because college required me to, or because or it was an investment memo or an investor update. That's literally the only writing I did until I left finance. I didn't quit to say I was going to start writing. No, I created this space, and in this space, I'm like, I'd like to express myself. I'd like to express myself to myself. So I would write like, I'm confused. I'm like, I'm 35. I'm confused. I thought I had it all, but turns out I didn't. I'm confused. Here's why I think I'm confused. 3 bullet points. And then I share that with a few friends and they're like, wow, I'm confused too. You nailed my confusion. I didn't even know I was confused until you laid it out that way. And I just kept doing that because, for me, like one of my big principles, I follow aliveness. It's like, if a thing brings me aliveness, just like keep doing it. And then if a thing like kind of sucks the joy out of you, like makes you dead inside, like stop doing it. And those things change. Like things that brought me aliveness 5 years ago made me feel dead inside 7 years, 7 years later. And so that was the thing. And then so people are like, "Hey, did you always know you're a writer?" No, not at all. And like, how am I crossing 10,000 hours as a writer? I'm writing a memoir right now, right? Because I gave myself the space to let my aliveness like grab like a foot finger hold, like if you use like climbing analogy. And from there, mountains started to get scaled, green shoot. I'm throwing all these analogies in the kitchen sink now. But like I gave myself the space to see where it was going to happen. I'll use another example. 10 years later, you see this MIDI keyboard, this on like right on the side of my desk. I was like, you know what? You've always wanted to learn how to make hip hop. Like you've talked about this for like 20 years. Why don't you do it? You have enough time. You have the funds, like hiring a music teacher. I'm like, you know why I didn't let myself do it? It's like, because a 45-year-old father of 2 is not allowed to be a hip hop producer, right? And I'm going to suck at it out of the gates because everyone knows anything related to music. You're talking another 10,000 hours. And so I'm like, you know what though? Like this is calling me. I feel alive now. It's for me. And already I'm seeing all these other skills show up. One is like, how do you tell a story in music? Well, guess what? I'm really good at telling a story with words. I'm okay at telling a story on a podcast. But music, you have to tell stories, right? You just can't use words. I mean, I use music with no vocals, but like so right away, I'm like, oh, and I'm seeing it bleed into like a TED Talk that I'm working on. And so again, it's that space, and you follow that aliveness, and you don't let someone say like, you're 45, you're not allowed to like be a music producer. Like that's
well, and
too
usually
old.
you're putting that on yourself too. That's not even, that's usually internal, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What about like, so the idea for that type,
Like-
the type of person who identifies with your stories, being willing to suck at something doesn't come naturally. Like I remember when I picked up golf, I was 30. Like I was a lefty. I had to learn how to play as a right. Like it was I was terrible. And so if you're playing with people who've played their whole lives, like you better be willing to be bad publicly, or or just don't do it. So any tips on how to suck in a way that helps people find that aliveness? Because I think I never heard it put that way, but following the energy to what you're interested in, admitting that it's not static. Like those are two really good things that people can, you can whip a notebook out and come up with some things really quickly. And then you're like, oh, well, yeah, I want to do music, but I stink at that. So therefore I'm not going down that path because that's pretty scary and I'm good at everything I do.
Yeah. You want to take that one, Lou?
Yeah, I mean, one is there's a perspective shift. I was listening to Kate talk, and like if you follow the great Bill Withers, he didn't start writing music publicly producing until he was in his 30s. He was making toilets for airplanes. And it's just like, you see these stories. You listen to John Batiste talk, he was just interviewed on Tim Ferriss. I've followed his career the last 5 years, got to see him in person. He said he was the least talented member of his family, of all his cousins and everybody else, but he just kept doing it. And there's a perspective shift, which I'm talking about, which is rather than thinking, wow, I'm going to suck at it, it's, wow, I'm learning. If you watch kids learn, they don't have this, what you just described, what we all do when we say, oh, someone think I can't do it or they're going to judge me. Like they don't have that. My son's like learning how to go to the bathroom, to use an exciting analogy here. And we're not getting into the details, obviously, but he's so excited about it. And he's just, he's doing the things, and his underwear is wet, this or that, but he goes to the bathroom on the toilet, just like, yeah, it's like he's so excited. He's just learning. And that's such a ridiculous analogy in some ways, but like,
no, there's a lot of wisdom in toddlers.
But just think about how rather than, wow, I'm going to suck for a little bit, the perspective is, oh, I'm actually learning, because we all sucked at things in our lives and we still do. And if we bring that curiosity to everything that we do, it's unbelievable what that can do. Cause you really are just totally shifting. And also know that everyone else who is really good at things sucked at some point too. And I remember I have two good friends who are authors, and I just thought they just started writing. And it just came out, and, oh my gosh, it was like this, divine, wisdom instilled in them, and they just started typing. It's not the case. Like they work every single day maniacally and go into deep, dark places and come back out and go back in and come back out and think their work sucks and throw away like a year's worth of work and then come back. And these are people who are critically acclaimed authors who I thought just did it, and it just happened. And you think about everything that we do in life, like it all takes a little bit of work, but there's other way to, and one other helpful tip in addition to perspective shift is one teacher talks about it as in get like 30% uncomfortable. Not 100%. Like when you go start to train for a marathon, you don't just go run 26 miles. You start with 1.
Right.
And you go 2, 5, 10, 20, etc. You don't actually even run the whole marathon, by the way, most training programs until you actually run it. But do that, like get a little bit uncomfortable and then recognize and be like, hey, this is cool. Like I'm uncomfortable. It's not making me deep, dark, anxious, uncomfortable, and then you start to build that up, and you're kind of psychologically that you're able to do these things. And you're like, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh, wow, I'm actually pretty good at this. Yeah. And it's fun. And then let go of the things that suck. I tried to play guitar and it was bringing me zero joy, or kind of, it was not my bliss, as Joseph Campbell talks about. And I stopped, and I'll still bring it out every now and then, but I was like, maybe at some point I'll go back to it. But you go pursue these things and you're like, actually, you know what? That's not my thing right now. And that's cool too, but I'm glad I tried it.
So to wrap up, and you guys have been great with your time. I really appreciate it. I want to do something maybe a little differently, which is maybe have the two of you play off each other a little bit to wrap up before I ask my last question. Okay. So this is going to be released first week of January, or thereabouts, for people to use it as a tool, hopefully to ask themselves their own questions, right? As they reflect on 24, look forward to 25. So between the two of you, what are, a couple questions, 2, 3, 4, whatever you think, but just what are questions that should be put on paper for people who are thinking about making a transition, who are at their own inflection point? What are the questions they can put on paper and just to give it space and see what comes back, as a way for them to get uncomfortable with making some of these big life decisions, which may be career oriented, it may not be, but these inflection points they're hard and they go to the back burner. So how do people bring it forward and say, these are some questions that I need to have an answer to help me feel better about where I'm headed?
I would say this is not my idea. It's a Tim Ferriss idea. He calls it a fear casting exercise. And so we're always kind of, we're all in the world of like what can go wrong, downside protection. And so in this fear casting exercise, he's like, so let's say the person wants to take a job with like a 50% pay cut, right? Let's just say for that, like better quality of life, less compensation. So then the question to ask could be, what, right? And you're already asking this question. And then you could say like, assuming the worst thing happens, what are some of the things that can mitigate it, right? Like what can I do now and what can I do when they happen? So if I put myself in that, just to put some meat on that, it's like, well, what can I do to mitigate some of the things that go wrong? Well, it's like, I didn't burn any bridges, right? And I had very good relationships in the financial services industry. So, and I worked to maintain those relationships, like almost like as a, safety valve, of sorts, right? And then, like you said, what can go wrong? Another risk mitigant that I used is like, I literally took the money and put it in another account. And then once it went to zero, I was like, okay, experiment over. I'm going back. Right. And I knew that I was employable. Along that vein though, I think people listening to this are probably pretty good at managing the downside. I think there's a question that's being missed though. And I see this all the time is people don't ask what can go right. And what can go right can be so simple. It could be, I have a boss who respects me, right? What can go right? I don't have to commute 2 out of 5 days. What can go right? It's like, and in my case, like I feel blessed, like 10 years later, like I can live by the beach, work from home, volunteer at my kid's school, and never get in a car despite living in LA.
And
right?
the feeling that creates, asking what can go right, and then really naming those and picturing them, like that makes it more real for that person, right?
And again, I would say that there's like all these gradations, right? Like for the longest one, I was just like, I don't want to have to read the Wall Street Journal every day. That would be a version of what can go right for me. Turns out that I still read the Wall Street Journal every day, but just for a very different reason, just for joy versus like what am I missing? So I really encourage that what can go right question. And definitely look up the full, I kind of very abbreviated the Tim Ferriss. Maybe we can put it in the notes.
Yeah, definitely.
Tim Ferriss fear casting exercise.
How about you, Lou?
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 questions I wish I asked myself. One is, who am I? Second was, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And the third is, what's the impact? The who am I is a harder one to write, because this is what we were talking about. It's kind of that brings out the identity earthquake, and you got to just see all the shadow and light. But then but ask other people too. Like get a legitimate, honest perspective. Who are we right now? I mean, that's so close to you, or you can do it more formally. But the second one is why. Like really, why am I doing these things? And if we talked about, and keep going deeper. Like, well, I want to make money. Okay. Why do I want to make money? Well, I want to have this. Well, why do I want to have that? And you keep going down and just start to understand that why, to get really smart about it. You may get to the point where you're just like, I have no idea why I'm doing this. Which is totally fine too. And the third one, what's the cost? Like physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationship wise. And I should say, what's the impact? There's also a lot of positives. Like, listen, I have this job. It's creating wealth where I don't have to worry about where my next meal is, these sort of things. Those are kind of the big questions. The other thing I'd ask, which Kay referenced and I just love, is, there's a wonderful interview with Joseph Campbell before he passed, who's kind of the great, he made the hero's journey popular, and George Lucas and a bunch of people were inspired by him, including yours truly. And he says, what is your bliss? Like, write these things down. What are those things that bring you life, that bring you joy, that bring you excitement? And yes, there's the dopamine, the quick hit, and those are the achievement, the drugs, and where dope comes from, it's dopamine, right? Like those are the quick pops. But what about the serotonin? If you gotta, for the very, including me who don't understand this stuff deeply, it's the joy. It's that sustaining joy. So what are those things that over and over again bring you joy? Like, man, I really love writing, as Kay said. I didn't even know this. I really enjoy, I'm going to try this thing out. Follow your curiosity. So write those things down. And then the other question, if you want a fifth question, which is related, is blue sky. What would you do if money wasn't an option? And just write it down and just start there. And then as you go through the next, I try to do this every day because I'm giving you things that I actually do, and they may or may not resonate with you, by the way, with any of the listeners. But notice when you do things, when you're in things, like, how am I feeling right now? Like my physical, somatic body, and like, am I tightening up? Am I really open? Like right now, I'm engaged. I'm energized, listening to Kay talk, listening to you and having this conversation. Like, it's like, this is fun. Like, I love this people. Like, I'm getting energy here. Like, and sometimes there's things that like just drain you. And I'm not just talking about like, I'm an analytical person or I'm an interpersonal person. It's like, if you go do this thing that you thought you do, that you love every day, like, do you?
Yeah.
Like, does it feel good?
Does it bring energy to the earlier point, right? Does it bring energy or is it sucking it from you?
Vital people vitalize the world. That's what Joseph Campbell said. I mean, it's true. Like, but a lot of us we're just dead, and we don't know. Like,
and in your case, that's physically.
Some people get to go there. I mean, I highly don't recommend dying for it. Just to be clear, that is where we're trying to avoid.
So I'd also add, Mike, there's one meta question that I love is you could even like zoom this out and have the listeners ask themselves, what is the most important question I should be asking myself right now?
Love it.
Yeah. And these things are scary, right? And then like, I remember when I first started writing things down, you feel stupid, right? Like you're like, well, this is wrong. Like this isn't the right way to do it. But sometimes it's as simple as asking the question, giving space, and then seeing what happens when you put pen to paper. There can be some really profound observations that come from something that simple.
And find somebody to talk to about it. I mean, you're obviously a therapist and these sort of things, but just find a friend. Like what in my journey, the fourth group of people, or fifth maybe, what Kay was talking about, the people are like, wow, I did that. Or I know this person that took some time. And those conversations were probably the most valuable, because when I meet someone like Kay and we meet each other, and I meet Mike and Tom Morgan introduced, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's other people. Like I'm not alone, but you can have these conversations with it. And I love getting deep with people other than my wife. My wife sometimes like, Lou, you gotta just let me chill. Like, let me just
it's sort of like a meme or something. Yeah. Like my wife at a certain point, she's like, no, that's great. I love this. Can you go do the dishes now? Like take the garbage out.
Can you go just put the baby to sleep right now? And I'm just gonna draw a bath. And I'm like, yeah. So we figured out, but you'll find people to talk to about this stuff too, in a healthy way, like friends. You'll know the people, and you guys, hey man, you want to do this thing with me? I'm listening to two crazy guys talking this podcast, and I'm going to go try it out. So
no, that's a good point. And I think that's something we try to do with this is bring different types of people in so that listeners can find new voices to help with some of these things. So
Yeah,
I
and
appreciate
sorry,
that.
just what I was kind of like, we're so, and especially in the US, like we're so individualistic. Like we think we got to do it all alone, and like, oh gosh, I got to take this thing on, I got to figure it out. I was like, no. Everybody actually generally wants to help and is asking these and is curious about these same things. So you don't have to do it alone.
So we'll end it with the question I've asked every podcast guest so far, and I may tweak it a little bit for Kay. Because I was doing a little homework for this conversation and found something interesting. But for Lou, given all you've known up to this point, all you've experienced up to this point, what advice are you giving to the 22-year-old version of yourself coming out of Chapel Hill, getting ready to, start life as an adult?
One, I'd give him a hug. I'd say, you're all right. Probably say, you're okay, man. Like, you're okay. Like all of it. And I'd probably just give my 22-year-old self a hug, honestly. And just say, you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it is that simple sometimes, right? I think the internal dialogue can be so overwhelmingly negative, and it can be a driver to a certain point until it's not. That sometimes that's what that 22-year-old probably needed to hear a little more often, maybe.
Yeah, probably you're good enough, man.
So Kay, I'll frame it a little bit differently, but take it either way you'd like. So usually I say 22-year-old, just from, you're starting your career at that point, starting adulthood in a lot of ways. But I had heard you in another interview, you kind of rephrased a similar question and said, my 12-year-old self. I'd probably talk to my 12-year-old self. And I thought that was really, really interesting, really powerful, because I think a lot of these parts of us that you both, were gracious and authentic enough to go into today are born, much earlier than 22. And so I'll pose that question to you.
Yeah. To the 12-year-old, that 12-year-old comes up very often in different modalities of therapy for me, like specifically that age. It would be very similar to Lou, like definitely would start with a hug, and it would just be like, you're incredible. You are safe. You have nothing to worry about, and you're loved.
And what about, would the answer be the same at 22? Maybe it is.
So that's what I need to tell my 45-year-old self.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding either.
Yeah, no, it's that hits very close to home. Well, thank you both.
Mike, could I you asked about practical, and every morning I try to journal. I don't do it every morning, and that's okay too. But what Kay's talking about right there, to his 45-year-old self, every morning I would start my journal. I say, good morning, beautiful self. And it's still, there's a little bit of a tinge, like, you shouldn't say that. Like, you can't say that. And at the end of it, I say, I love you. And that's how I wrap. And in between is wild, but, I say it every morning because I don't say it enough. And I think what Kay's talking about, it, even at our ages, it's like, man, we need it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's as good a place to end as any. So I appreciate you both. And I think this is a good way to start the year. And I hope and know that listeners will get something out of it in their own, their own stories, their own journeys. So thank you both for sharing. I truly appreciate it. The information in this interview is provided for informational purposes only and should not be taken as investment, legal, or tax advice. Opinions expressed in this interview are subject to change without notice. It is important to remember that investments in securities involve risk, including the potential loss of principal invested. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, and diversification does not guarantee a profit or protect against loss in a declining financial market. Alliance Wealth Advisors is an investment advisory firm that is independently owned and operated. Alliance does not make any representations as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by an unaffiliated third party mentioned in this communication and takes no responsibility. Our guest did not receive any compensation for this interview, is not affiliated and not a client of Alliance Wealth Advisors at the time of this publication. For more information regarding Alliance, please visit alliancewealthadvisors.com/legal disclosures.